Alright, so this is my garage shelving project. This is a before shot of what I had before I started. There's stuff scattered on both sides of the walls. My wife parks her SUV in here, but there's not enough room to park two vehicles right now. I don't expect there will be because the kayaks take up so much room and I don't want to hang them or put them on their sides for easy in and out access. So just getting an idea of what it looks like right now before we get started. And a teaser of what it ends up as a final product. All right, so step one, prep the wall. I've removed everything hanging and I've also got to take care of this cable that's running out of the wall along the baseboards. So here you can see I've cut a hole in the drywall to run that cable straight down. I've fed it between the drywall and the concrete below. I use these metal cable staples to keep the cable close into the wall. After fixing the cable, I went ahead and took some drywall patch and filled in some of the holes and divots that were in the drywall, just previous damage to the drywall to try to get it ready. I'll end up painting this wall after I get the shelving completely done. I use this Alex Plus spackling. All right, step number two is to mount the studs. I use an electronic stud finder to find them generally behind the drywall, and then I run a very small drill bit into the wall to verify that that's indeed where they're at. Once I've done that, I'm ready to begin mounting the studs. In this situation, the studs, when you put them flush against the drywall, are not flush at the bottom because the concrete below the drywall is somewhat beveled out. You can see it doesn't really get flush because of that space right there. So I end up having to cut off a portion of the stud at the base to make sure that it stays flush. And always remember to wear PPE when you're doing woodwork, whether it be a face mask, goggles, earplugs, gloves, anything needed to operate the machinery safely and keep yourself healthy. In order to get the right angle on the bottom of the stud, I estimate the distance away from the wall and up the wall, and then use a right triangle calculator on the internet to estimate the angle on my miter, and then I cut the 2x4 to that angle. As you can see here, the stud is now flush against the wall and it's not being interfered with by the concrete on the bottom. All right, now I've got all of my vertical support studs mounted. I did the same exercise of finding the right angle for each stud to make it fit at the bottom, and cut the appropriate angle using the calculators on the internet. And as you can see on this last one, it didn't require any shaving off, so that was good. All right, step three is mounting the horizontal supports. As I mount the horizontal supports, I notice that my garage is slightly inclined, which it should be for good drainage out into the driveway. The builders were nice enough to do that when they built the house, but makes my 7-foot tall studs not the same height at the top. So what I ended up doing is using my level to find where I need to cut those tops off, and I used the handsaw to do that. Here you can see all of the top horizontal supports are added. So now I'm ready to begin adding the protruding shelf pieces to the top shelf. All right, I made myself a little stop block to make all of my horizontal supports the same length, so I can just line it up and start cutting each one by one. Here you can see I've got all of my horizontal supports. All right, I made a little jig here to help support my supports while I screwed them into the wall using Kreg screws. These are 2.5-inch blue coat screws that I used for my shelving unit. And this is what they look like after they've been mounted. You can see I've added each one here. So now I'm ready to begin adding the braces. And here's a top-down look at how these horizontal protruding members look against the wall. Here are my braces that I've added. I used the right triangle calculators on the internet to determine the hypotenuse based on the height and the base that I needed to support this particular shelf. All right, after the braces are installed, I went ahead and added the outer supports. Prior to hanging the protruding members, I cut or drilled Kreg screw holes into both sides so that I could mount them to the outer supports without having screws going from out in. And then in my situation, I decided to cut a short 6-inch piece here that installed in the middle of the two 8-foot studs to make a total of 16 foot when it was all completely done. And then I mounted the plywood on top of the completed top shelf and went ahead and put some stuff on there to see how it looked, and it looks great. Now some examples of what I did for the middle shelves, showing the stages of progress that I made by just doing exactly what I did on the top shelf. The brace is now installed, just like I did on the top shelf. I chose 18 inches of space between each shelf because of what I thought I needed for what I plan to store on my shelves, but those could be adjusted however needed. In addition to having lots of extra room on the bottom on the ground. This is showing how I mounted the 6-inch blocks to the outer edge boards using Kreg screws, and then once that was done, I was able to hang these on the shelf using my ladder to help support one end while I screwed in the other end, and then use my level to make sure that they're completely level from one end to the other. I could have chosen to add these back supports earlier than now, but this is the order that I did it. So now I'm adding the back supports to each wall so that they support each shelf just like on the top. This is showing the boards supported while I screw them together. And then finally the bottom shelf, using my stepladder again to support it while I screwed in one end and then made my way down to the other end. Just like I hung the vertical studs, I used 3-inch spax screws to mount these horizontal pieces to the wall. I used a circular saw and this guide rail to do my cutting for each shelf. The top shelf was just a rectangle, but the middle shelves had to be cut out using a coping saw to make sure they fit flush against the wall. So that's what I did on these middle shelves. You can see here where the pieces need to be cut out to match. And this is all three shelves installed against the wall. Obviously I need to do all the finishing on these shelves and do the rest of the garage, so I'll be showing you that next. Here's a bunch of stuff stacked on the shelves now that I have that completed, and I'm working now on the right side of the garage, basically doing the exact same thing that I did on the left, putting the studs against the wall, cutting the angles on the bases to fit with the concrete on the bottom of the floor, and then making the 2x4 vertical studs the appropriate height to make them level as the slope increases up into the back of the garage, and adding the protruding members as well. I'm building a workbench right here in this corner next to the circuit breaker box. I've been using folding tables for a workbench for far too long, work tables, so now I'm going to build this portion of the garage into a work table. Because of this circuit breaker box and the height of my top 2x4, I cut a small rabbet into this section of 2x4 to compensate for the circuit breaker box. Alright, I'm ready for a bunch more braces on the right side, so I just did a simple 45-degree angle on my miter and started cutting 2x4s one by one to get them ready for installation. Here's my stack of braces all ready to go. I didn't show you how I was doing the pocket holes on the braces, so I'm giving you a sample of that right here. Drilling 2 holes at an angle with the 2x4 brace set inside my jig. Once those 2 holes have been cut, then I turn it over and do the other side to get those ready to go. Cut 2 more holes, so I have holes on both sides, and then they're ready to screw into the 2x4 studs. You can see a bunch more Kreg screws later and a whole lot of clamping, and I've got braces being installed on my studs. And here's how all the braces look. I chose to only do 2 shelves on this side because I wanted some space underneath for some power tools and etc. Here's my horizontal pieces all added to those 2 shelves, so you can see it's coming together just like on the left side of the garage. Just only have 2 shelves here. And continue working on my workbench area as well. Now to the most exciting part of the garage renovation. I'm beginning to work on my workbench, the long-awaited workbench. I've got my protruding member of the workbench, the tabletop set with a very long brace because of the width of the workbench. Basically doing the exact same thing as the shelves, but different dimensions to compensate for the width of the workbench. Did 2 side-by-sides just to give it extra support. I wanted a whole lot of support on this workbench depending on what I do on top of it. To attach these 2 side by side, I use more Spax screws, 3-inch screws to connect these 2. And this is how the 2 pieces look together, with the horizontal piece in the back to support the back end. Once the braces were complete, I went ahead and added the front member. So just finishing it out piece by piece, almost identical to the shelving units, just for a workbench. This happened to be an 8-foot long workbench, so I used 1 8-foot stud to do the front. Once the front horizontal member was added, I went ahead and cut pieces to length to fit in between the 2 braces, just for additional support underneath my table. And I went ahead and put another sheet of plywood, just like for the shelves, nothing too fancy on my workbench for now. Maybe I'll go back with something sturdier, thicker later, but This is how I did it for now. Cut out some pieces around my vertical 2x4 studs, um, and went ahead and put some stuff underneath it now that I have this extra storage room in my garage. These are little close shots of how I cut out those notches for my 2x4s. So a good fit there. The final product, finally, it looks great. I've got lots of new storage space all over my garage. Plenty of room in the back by the door, a big beautiful workbench with a light added for some visibility. Got plenty of tools stored under my 2 shelves on the right. Got some blankets just to cover everything for dust protection, etc. when I'm in the garage. And I couldn't be happier with the final product here. It's just an amazing renovation that I am so happy with and was very cheap. About $200 for all this lumber, 2x4s, plywood, and all screws combined. So very happy with this final product.